Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Skalberg here, Consolidated Planning Group. We are happy to be back today with Dr. Garcia. She's going to be talking to us about effective parenting techniques for the neurodiverse child. And so I know that this topic is it is not a topic that we always do, but we do hear from the families that we serve. I myself am a parent to multiple adult children that are neurodiverse, and I do know that parenting sometimes can be very challenging. And I would say parenting can be challenging on a good day without neurodiverse kids, right? They don't come with a manual. We didn't get the book on that. You get these kids and you think you got one all figured out, and then you have another one and they're night and day difference. So we're going to be talking about that today. So we're glad that you're here. Today's webinar is being recorded. Everyone will get a link to the recording and a copy of today's slides in a PDF. So if there's any links or anything that she talks about during her presentation today, you are going to get a copy of the slides. All of our past webinars live on the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel, where you can subscribe to that for free. There are over 600 webinars on planning for special needs. If you can think of a topic, we've probably done it, and it is probably out there, and we've tried to label them in such a way to where you can kind of search for the topic for where you are in your journey when it comes to your loved one. Consolidated Planning Group, for those of you that are joining for the very first time, you've never attended our webinars, welcome. We're very glad you're here. If you've attended in the past, welcome back. We're glad that all of you are here. We're a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy, chartered special needs consultants. Our whole firm is nuanced in planning for the future of a loved one with a disability. Who's going to care for them when you're gone? How much money do we need to fund a special needs trust? How and when? What should we apply for when it comes to public benefits? How do we maintain eligibility for said programs? We help with all of those things. So our webinars that we do them on a weekly basis. We usually do 2 to 3 a week. They're always at lunchtime from 12 to 1. They're always recorded. And they're just a variety of topics. So in the slide deck today, you'll get a link for our upcoming webinars that you can sign up for any of the webinars that you're interested in going forward. And what I just want to say today, and I say this often, sometimes I feel like a broken record, but first I want to say today is not about looking back, it's about looking forward. What can we do more effectively next time? Today, tomorrow, the next day. And that's true when it comes to your parenting and, the things that you're working through with your loved one. And it is also true as it relates to planning for the future of your loved one with a disability. So it's not about beating ourselves up about what we haven't done or what needs to be done or what is broken. It's what steps are we taking today to move ourselves forward in the direction that you want to go. So having said that, I do have a couple of write-in questions that came today, so I will read those today. We are in webinar mode today, which means that we can't see you or hear you, but we do know you're here and we're glad you've joined us. If you have questions throughout the presentation, just put them in the chat box. I will be monitoring that chat box and I'm going over those questions with Dr. Garcia. And so if anything else comes up, just put that in. But if you send in a write-in question, we already have them and no need to add those to the chat box. So I think I've covered the housekeeping things. And welcome again. We've got Carmen and Carmen's role. You are a did you say a research intern with Dr. Garcia?
I am a psychology doctoral intern at UT Health. I will be graduating with my doctoral degree in May to be a clinical psychologist.
Okay, yes, awesome. So thank you. I'm sure that the work that you are working with is invaluable for sure. So thank you for being here. All right, Dr. Garcia, take it away. Let's talk to us about effective parenting techniques for the neurodiverse child.
Thank you for having me again. I'm always happy to interface with the Consolidated Planning Group. They do amazing work and be able to engage with parents as well. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is effective parenting techniques for the neurodiverse child. And so like Allison said, please feel free to ask questions. I know I don't like being lectured at for 45 minutes straight. So feel free to put questions as you have them in the chat box. Also recognizing that, you may be asking questions about something difficult, right? Um, Parenting is hard. I have a 2.5-year-old, so I'm in the trenches. Um, so I get it. So I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing your experiences parenting a neurodiverse child as well. And just as a reminder, this is webinar is purely educational purposes, and this is not establishing like a psychologist to client relationship. And so anytime I talk to parents or other members of the autism community, I always like to share and kind of center myself and where I am at in the autism community. And so on the left-hand side, those are pictures of me and my family. So my older sister, she's 18 months older than me to the day, was diagnosed with autism as a young child. And so growing up, I always knew what autism was, and I always knew of it in kind of this neurodiversity lens, which I'll explain what that means. And so growing up, I kind of served as a social skills trainer, feeding therapist. I had her try ice cream for the first time. But I was kind of more in a, well, I was her sibling, but more like in a therapeutic role at times. So my job now is more assessment. I'm currently an assistant professor and licensed psychologist at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, in the Lifespan Autism Clinic. So this clinic used to be called Class Clinic. It was started by Dr. Kate Loveland, if any of you are familiar with her and the amazing work she has done in her career. And so in my role at UT Health, I provide autism evaluations for people of all ages and all levels of functioning. So I'll see as young as 18 months with co-occurring developmental delays, co-occurring intellectual impairment, all the way up through people in their 60s and 70s coming in.
Okay,
So
I
that's
want
kind
to
of my role.
pause on that and I want to ask questions about that because I think that so there's UT and then there's like evaluations at Texas Children's and some of these I think that there's been like long timelines and long waits and things like that. Is there other criteria for a family? I understand a lot of families are here, you've already got your diagnosis, you're way past that. But for a young family that has suspicions and they're waiting for that diagnosis, what is that timeline to get into your clinic? And do you guys have suggestions for other clinics if your timeline is long?
Yes. So my wait is approximately 6 months to a year. I do try to prioritize the littles if I can, just, so they can get in. But in addition to my clinics, I'm in the Department of Psychiatry. We also have the Developmental Neuropsychology Clinic with Dr. Deb Pearson, also someone who's been around for a while. And she sees kids only, and their wait is usually shorter, but I think it's longer right now. And then we also have the Duncan Clinic within the Department of Pediatrics. They do amazing work there. They have psychologists, nurse practitioners, they have developmental pediatricians, and they're pediatrics, so they see all the kids and adolescents. So at UT Health, we have a number of clinics that do autism assessments, and then of course we have Texas Children's Autism Center, which is great. Some of my friends work there too. So we have a number of clinics within, academic medical centers that people can get plugged into for an
And I
autism
know that we
evaluation.
have like referred to other psychologists that we know that do testing, but not all
Hmm.
psychologists do testing. In fact, more of them don't.
Right.
There are options. So, I mean, if you are really, really desired to get that testing done sooner versus later, if it's a year you're looking at, there are other options. I just want to encourage people not to be discouraged because I think
Right.
if you're suspecting something like that, you're already stressed about it, right? And then if you have to wait a year or a year and a half, it feels like you're a year or a year and a half behind on giving them or getting them the resources that they need to be successful. So, okay, I just wanted to ask about that. So let's
Yeah,
talk
great
about
question.
ASD.
Yes. Yeah, so I know, and again, anytime I like to give this talk, I do like to make sure we're all on the same page about what autism is. Because there's so much information about what autism is out there. So the way I talk about autism, it's a neurodevelopmental difference. So that just means your brain has developed differently. And we know that the prevalence of autism has increased, which means more people are being diagnosed with it. Now it's 1 in 31 US children. Now, does that necessarily mean that the incidence or the rate of autism has increased? Not necessarily. It's because we have more and more professionals who are able to diagnose accurately. Our understanding of autism has broadened and increased, things like that. We do know that autism impacts all groups pretty equally, but disparities in timing of diagnosis exist. Um, but we know that autism can be reliably diagnosed around 2 years of age. Some people will diagnose it earlier, but 2 is a really good time to be identified. So the way I explain autism, it's a neurodevelopmental difference. So it impacts the way that you communicate and interact with people and process the world around you. So that's how I describe this restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviors and interests. We call those RRBs. But really it kind of changes the way that you just process everything. So socially, right, we see kids where they may have problems with back and forth play. As they get older, they may have problems with back and forth conversation. So being able to recognize, okay, I asked this question, I shouldn't ask more because then I become like an interviewer or an interrogator, right? We see differences in nonverbal communication. So a lot of the folks I see are able to make eye contact and it looks mostly appropriate, but for them it feels very uncomfortable. I've had adults say that eye contact feels painful. So, if your child is having difficulties making eye contact with you, it might not be because they're trying to be disrespectful or anything, right? It's because their brain is just wired in such a way that it is painful to engage in nonverbal communication in a neurotypical way. Then we also see differences in relationships. So that's the initiation of them, maintaining them, understanding them. So, as your child gets older, right, people may start talking about dating. A lot of the folks I see, they're like, I didn't care about that. Which I know as a parent, I'm like, that'd be fine. But it's an important milestone. So that understanding of like social nuances, stuff like that. Under this RRB, we see areas of intense interest. So, having encyclopedic knowledge about certain topics, movies, TV shows, even celebrities. There is some research on like what are the common areas of interest, but really people with autism can have interest in anything. It's just the intensity of it that becomes um, diagnostic. Then we see repetitive motor mannerisms. So this can range from whole body rocking, hand flapping, pacing, more subtle hand and finger posturing movements, things like that. We also see something called an insistence on sameness, and this can look like a wide range of things. So black and white thinking, so things needing to be a certain way or a certain order, having a strong sense of justice, which can be considered a strength, right? Knowing what is and what isn't right. It's just navigating, okay, how do I communicate that in a tactful way? Um, Difficulties with changes in routine or unexpected changes. So a lot of people I don't like change either, right? Some people thrive on chaos and change. I'm certainly not one of those people. But for people on the autism spectrum, it can be very, very, very disruptive. Again, it's not that they're trying to be difficult. It's that this unexpected change or changing routine um, is like earth-shattering. Lastly, we see sensory differences. So this is another kind of core feature of, emotion dysregulation if you're just constantly overstimulated at times. So having sensitivities to loud sounds, bright lights, clothing textures. Imagine being so bothered by the tags on your clothing you were just so dysregulated all the time, right? Like that is very disruptive. Having sensory seeking behaviors, so looking at things really closely out of the side of the eye, stuff like that. So that's how I describe um, what autism is. But if anyone wants to share, feel free to put in the chat. How would you define autism? What are some of the strengths you've noticed in your own children, things like that?
One of the words that people throw around all the time is the spectrum. And with all the families that we work with, it truly is And if you've met one child or 100, you've met 100 different displays of how autism affects them, right? And some are twice exceptional, where they have really, really high IQ, and some have an intellectual disability. Like it's just really so across the board. And I know, I'm sure you're going to talk about like comorbid conditions when we have ADHD or anxiety or depression or OCD or some of these other, I call it alphabet soup that we throw in with some of these. And sometimes because there's overlapping kind of characteristics of each one of those things, it's hard to know what's coming from what.
Right. Exactly. And we know that, people with autism are an increased likelihood of experiencing things like ADHD, anxiety. The way I think about it, right, is if I'm, overstimulated, the world was not designed for me. Of course, I'm going to experience what is an anxiety disorder, right, or depression if it's not treated. And so I see one person in the chat, Melody said the brain works differently. Exactly right. Thank you for sharing that. Now that we're on the same page of what autism is, I'm going to talk more about what is this idea of neurodiversity. When we say neurodiverse or neurotypical, what does that even mean? So I'm an autism person. So this presentation is mainly focusing on autism, but just know that neurodiversity can include things like ADHD, learning disorders, intellectual disabilities, things like that. So this idea of neurodiversity has kind of been around for a while, just wasn't named until Judy Singer. She wrote a master's thesis on her experience as an autistic woman with an autistic mother, in her first experiences on like online autistic e-groups. But a more recent article came out that the term neurodiversity was actually kind of developed collectively by autistic advocates. So neurodiversity basically means that we need all types of brains to make the world go round. So when you hear, neurodevelopmental disorder, right, autism spectrum disorder, it makes it sound like it's really, really terrible. Which, you know, not to discredit or discount the real difficulties that people on the autism spectrum and their families experience, right? There are real difficulties, but there are lots of strengths that get missed when we think about autism in this way.
Dr.
But
Garcia, we did a webinar. We've done a couple of webinars with Dr. Temple Grandin, and who is on the autism spectrum herself when autism wasn't cool and nobody knew about autism way back. I mean, I think she's in her 70s now, right? And she is a professor in Arizona, and she's had a lot of success. But one of the things I said all that to say, well, number one, that's on our YouTube channel, so go check it out. But one of the big things that I took away from her is she talked about, so what? Your kid isn't good with math, so what? What are they good at? And that sounds so strong, but like it really resonated with me. So we're so busy keeping up with the Joneses on Facebook and at work and in our social circles and other people's kids and stuff like that. And she really focusing on what they are good at, and so what they're not good at, and leveraging their strengths. We've heard of spiritual gifts, we've heard of all kinds of things, and she really talked about that. She even talked about, as a young adult, having a cry room. She had to have a cry room to get through every day at work, but that's what worked for her, and look at her success now. So that just stuck. And so maybe they're never going to be great at math. Maybe you have a math wizard, and maybe they will be a wonderful engineer, and they will have zero social skills of getting along with other people, right? But they need those people, those engineers, those bean counters, that nobody else's brain works like that. They are needed, and it's okay for them to be amazing at that. So check that out. I think I needed to hear that as a parent. I think it was very good.
yeah, I got to meet Temple Grandin, and then my mom actually met her way back in the day in the 90s. So it was kind of cool that we both got to meet her. But yes, so neurodiversity basically is this idea, right, that autism and other things like ADHD, learning disorders are just naturally occurring variants in human neurology. And so when we think about autism within this neurodiversity lens, right, neurodivergent folks or neurodiverse folks are living in a world that is built for neurotypical people. And so there are certain behaviors that we are learning about and have names for now that autistic people have been doing forever. One of those things is camouflaging or masking. And so this means you're trying to pass in a social situation. It can look like sitting on your hands so you don't fidget with your hands and fingers, right? Imitating neurotypical behavior. I never recognized why my sister was copying me all the time until I learned about this and I was like, oh, she was trying to mask. Which I was like, oh boy, I'm her social model. But right, I was like, why do you keep copying me? It's because she was trying to imitate quote unquote neurotypical behavior. And individuals on the autism spectrum engage in this behavior for many reasons, to gain friendships, to avoid being teased or bullied, right? Um, things like that. But we know that camouflaging comes with a cost. So there's research that shows that the more you camouflage, you're more physically exhausted, literally, like you're fatigued, and it leads to extreme anxiety. And it can also lead to like kind of a crisis in identity development. Like, I don't even know who I am because I've been acting like other people. But it's important to know about that concept. Another concept that I wanted to bring up is something called the double empathy problem. Because again, right, when we think of autism as something that's really bad and a disorder, if something goes wrong between an autistic person and a non-autistic person, someone may think, oh, it's all on the autistic person. They didn't understand what I was trying to say. That's not necessarily true. It's a double empathy problem. So when there are communication breakdowns between a neurotypical parent and neurodiverse child, or adult child, right? It might not only be on the autistic child. It's a breakdown between both people caused by both parties' difficulties in understanding.
Can you talk about, so you talked about the masking, and I thought that that was interesting. So as a parent, if you see your kid is masking, I mean, what are things that a parent should do to make it okay not to mask? Or like I heard we've partnered with one psychologist and we talked about autism being their superpower or
Yeah.
ADHD being their superpower, that they have the ability to think or do things that other people can't or don't do. How, so do we leave it alone? Do we ignore it? Do we just understand that that's what the behavior is? I mean, certainly don't want to punish it, but how do you encourage a person to be who they are, and who they are is not broken? Um,
Yes. It's such a tough balance because, right, at some point we all have to camouflage in like when let's say you worked in retail, right? It's like, well, I developed scripts when I worked at Pier 1 Imports, if you guys remember that, right? You have to kind of put on a certain mask. But for autistic people, it's all the time. So I think as parents, creating an environment at home where they can be themselves. I have a lot of families where they're like, my kids come home from school and they just like strip and just need to be like alone in their room with the air conditioning on them. Like if they've just been like overstimulated and dealing with a lot of executive functioning, right? Of like having to mask and do school all the same time, just letting them have that cool down period before coming home. Of course, I know a lot of us as parents where it's like, how was your day? Good. That may be a lot of kids. But for parents of autistic children, maybe just letting them have like a chill down time, that transition between school and home, letting them engage in their interests, of course, without getting in the way of like chores, schoolwork, stuff like that. So unfortunately, I can't give you a perfect, here's the answer because it's so nuanced, but I
but I
think
have
the
another
key would be,
question.
uh-huh,
Like, also, to me, if they are masking, that also sounds to me like a sign of intelligence.
right.
Of if I do this or I mask a certain extent, if I sit on my hands so my hands don't flap so people don't make fun of me.
Mhm.
I mean, if they are masking in a way of self-preservation, is that wrong?
Right, exactly.
I
No,
mean,
and
and
what
I
the
guess all humans do that to a certain extent, right?
Right. And I mean, the answer really is that the world needs to be more accepting, which
Sure.
I feel like I don't know. I don't know what your guys' experience of this has been, but having access to fidget tools, yep, um, is a very common accommodation, having like fidget cubes or needle, like there's so many like items that people can get now. Um, so yeah, the real answer is that everyone should be more accepting, not just aware of autism. But as parents, what can we do now is creating that environment at home.
And I just wanted to be clear for the people that we have on here that we have people that just had a 2-year-old that was just diagnosed with level 2, and we have someone on here that has a
Hmm.
55-year-old son with our child with autism. So it is all across the board as far as the ages are concerned, who is out here. And so one person said, what about self-destructive behavior diversions? So again,
Hmm.
we're not trying to change, or fix our kids. We're not trying to fix anybody, but what are effective parenting skills or diversions for self-destructive behavior or other behaviors that, are
Yeah.
less than ideal in relationship
So,
settings?
there are pain stems so you can get like they're little ouchies is what they're called. Or now there's like jewelry. It's like well, it's been around for a while, but it's like little necklaces and things if they are able to use those, that they can use. It's all about replacing the behavior. So if they're hurting themselves or someone else, you can't just ignore that. You do have to figure something out. So if they're banging their head, usually pediatricians will just say like, okay, put a pillow. That's really what you can do is just like mitigate or harm reduce. But if it's something like pain, like pulling hair or like skin picking, things like that, you can get the little ouchies. That's what they're called, the pain stems, things like that.
So
That's
I've
what I
I've heard
recommend.
about a lot of stuff, and I'm sorry I don't know about the little ouchies. So I
Okay.
imagine that there's other people here that don't either. Do I get that on Amazon? What is that?
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, if you just Google like little ouchies, it'll come up, or pain stems. There are some other ones too. They're like a little spiky hair ties. They're not spiky, but um, I have friends who use those. But
So like yeah, and I have seen a lot of the different things, and I know like middle schoolers, and you might think, okay, well, it's not middle school, but those little they're almost like those bubble things that you pop, but it's like a rubber tool. I don't know what they're called. I'm sorry, I'm calling them
hmm
the wrong things, but like they have these little bubbles on there, and they just push them in and out and things like that. The
Oh, little
fidget
poppets.
spinners. Yeah,
Yeah,
the puppets.
poppets.
I thought I was
Hmm
thinking of something else. That's what I was
hmm
going to call them. But those are popular. Other things, those putties. There's all
Yes.
different levels of putties, and some of them are cool to look at, different colors and stuff like that, and different strength. Like some of them are harder to manipulate in their hands, some are easier, and things like that. So basically, you're saying that those are some things that might be helpful.
Yes. Yeah, and I would unfortunately there isn't a lot of like adult ABA or applied behavior analysis or behavioral therapy. But feel
But
free
some
to
of that
email.
dialectical behavior therapy, they'll talk
Mm,
about things
yeah.
like taking a walk or taking a shower or putting an ice cube on your wrist. Like if there are
Exactly.
some things like I know for one of our kids, she had a little band on her
Yeah.
hand, and we told her to try to catch herself where if she was over talking, like at a dinner table or in a setting or something like that, or if somebody gave her a wink, then she would, do you know what I mean? It's just like a little
Right.
stimulation to just know, so it wasn't embarrassing. Um, but she was learning and trying to grow and trying to improve those behaviors as well. But the ice cube works, the walk
hmm
works, and having the like a support person of a person that you trust or something like that that you could talk to. And we've even seen things like the boxing gloves and the punching bag, or other things like that. And maybe that's more, kind of more physical or in the range of violence that you don't want to promote. But I think different things work for different people, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and those are called TIP skills for DBT. So it's temperature, intense exercise, progressive muscle relaxation, and paced breathing. And so again, if you just
Those
Google
work,
TIP,
you just have to remember to do them. And if you're in the
exactly.
height of a meltdown or height of a crisis or height of a self-destructive behavior, it's probably
Right.
the last thing that you're thinking of. But
Hmm.
talking to them about those things while everybody is calm is a good thing. And,
Hmm.
what next time this happens, what strategy would you like us to implement? What do you think would be make the most sense? And then, engaging your plan when the next time happens. I don't know. Some of those things were effective in my house.
Hmm. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I do want to make sure Carmen has enough time to discuss kind of the behavior management strategies, but really quickly, we know there are lots of strengths of autism. I'll put that in the chat. Tip skills. Um, the strengths of autism. As we've said, right, when you've met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism. But research shows that in general, um, autistic people tend to have strengths in like visual spatial skills, um, creativity, like music. There are lots of strengths. So if you have any for your, in your own life, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to pass it now to Carmen to discuss behavior management strategies. We kind of have it for little kids and for um, older children, adolescents, adults. Just so you guys.
Can you just repeat the tip skills, temperature, intense exercise?
I'll put it in the chat so it's in writing,
Okay,
but
perfect. All right, thank
yeah,
you. All right, thank you, Carmen. Again, we are excited that you are here, and we're excited to hear about these behavior management strategies because I think that's what we all need.
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carmen Ibarra, and again, I'm a doctoral psychology intern at UT Health. I am also a bilingual school psychologist, and I've been practicing in the field of school psychology for the past 10 years. So now let's talk about some of the behavior management strategies. The first component that we're going to address is the antecedent, and you're probably wondering, what is this or what does this even mean? This is essentially anything that happens before a behavior. This is what we called the trigger. So it's usually a situation or a demand or an event, right, that sets the stage for what is about to happen. And when we think about the antecedent is very important to think about it as like the why now moment. Why did the behavior occur right then and not, for example, like 10 minutes ago or later? Perfect. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so now the B is for the behavior. So when we think about behavior, we're talking about any action that can be observed or described. It's important to remember that behavior is not just like the bad stuff, it includes everything a child does, such as raising their hand or asking for help or walking away or playing quietly or even like yelling. So, in other words, behavior is and will always be a form of communication. It is telling us something about what the child needs, wants, or is trying to avoid. And when we look at behavior through this lens, right, of communication, we stop labeling kids as defiant or lazy, and we truly should start asking ourselves, what are they trying to tell me through this action? And also, when we describe behavior, we want to use very, like, again, objective, neutral language. So instead of saying, oh, he was being disrespectful, we should describe what that action looked like or what you actually saw. So, for example, like he crossed his arms and turned away, when I asked him to finish his work. And again, like this really helps us analyze behavior patterns without judgment.
Vivian Schutte at Brookwood talked about this as we look at behaviors. So it's not of the wrong or the terrible thing that they did or whatever, is when we're seeing big behaviors, it's showing us that there is an unmet need that they may not be able to communicate. And so looking at it from that way of that big behavior is an unmet need. And it doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It just means they weren't able to effectively communicate that in such a way, maybe because they're nonverbal or other reasons. But that unmet need, if we can get to the root of the unmet need, then we may see some of those behaviors improve and change.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. That's a great observation. Um, Also, when we think about consequence, if we go to the next slide.
Is it showing consequence on your slide? Because that's what I'm seeing here.
Okay, there it is. Now it updated. So
Okay.
for the consequences, right? This is simply what happens immediately after the behavior. So it's how the environment or how we respond to that behavior. Sometimes the consequences are natural. And by this, I mean, it's like, for example, if a kid touches a hot stove, they feel pain. So that's a natural consequence that teaches them, hey, you know what? We should not be doing this again because it's going to hurt. Other times, consequences can either be social or they can be environmental. So things like being sent to like timeout or even like getting a hug or, being ignored or receiving attention. Because again, remember, consequence is not just the negative outcome, it also has positive outcomes. And the big takeaway here is that if behavior keeps happening, there is something about that consequence that is reinforcing it, even if it's unintentional. So if the child is getting something valuable out of it, whether it's attention or escape or access to something they want, it's going to keep happening. Okay, so now let's talk about the functions of behavior, because again, behavior serves a function, and again, behavior is a form of communication because this is what the child is saying. They're saying, "I need something," and there's typically four common functions of behavior that I will talk about in the next slides. So when we look about or think about, escape or avoidance, this is one of the most common functions of behavior. This essentially means that the child is engaging in behavior to get away from something. This can be a demand, a task, a situation, or even a person that just feels uncomfortable for them. So, like in this example, the student has learned that if they hit a classmate, they get sent out of the classroom. So while it may look like the student is being aggressive, the real motivation is to escape the lesson or the removal from the task, right? When the child finds this very hard or boring or stressful, that becomes a reward because that reinforces the behavior. Right. Another example can be like if a teen refuses to attend a family gathering because, social situations feel very draining or they feel very anxiety provoking. This The avoidance helps reduce some of the stress in the short term, but it reinforces a pattern of escape in the long run. Now, the next function of behavior is attention. This is one of the most common motivators behind behavior. Children love to engage in behaviors that get a reaction or even an acknowledgement from others. And when we think about attention, or the easiest way to get attention is through bad attention or like through negative behaviors, because that's mostly when parents or teachers or other adults are calling on students or are on the kids like, hey, don't do this, don't do that. So it's much easier to get that negative attention than that positive attention. But for example, on this side, if a child bangs their head while their dad is on the phone, right? The behavior seems extreme, but it is serving a clear function. And in this case, it's to get dad's attention. So even if the dad stops talking for a moment and says, hey, like, stop that, the child has achieved the goal. And that goal is to get dad's attention or to shift the attention from the phone to them. Or, for example, another example is that if a child makes silly noises during dinner and the siblings laugh, the laughter is reinforcing. And it tells the child, if I do this, everyone's going to look at me. So essentially, when we look or when we think about attention seeking behaviors, it's important to remember that attention doesn't always mean praise. Sometimes it's a scolding, a sight, or like even just eye contact that can reinforce that behavior if that's what the child is attempting to seek. And the other type of function of behavior that we commonly see is access. And by this, I mean is when a child truly engages in a behavior to either get something that they want. This can be a preferred item, it could be an activity, or it can be another person. And the motivation is, I want that, and this behavior is going to get it for me. So, an example of this is if a child screams very loudly when mom turns off the TV. After several times of doing this, he's going to learn that if he screams long enough, mom will turn back on the TV to stop the meltdown. Or if we are at the grocery store and the child just cries very loudly because they want a candy bar and they're not getting it, when the parent buys it to calm them down, this reinforces the crying. And guess what? They're going to keep doing it more and more and more. And the screaming and the crying in these examples were reinforced. And hey, it worked. The child got what they wanted. And because it worked once, they're going to keep doing it over and over again. The other function that we see in behavior is what we call self-stimulatory or automatically rewarding behavior. So, in other words, this is what we refer to like stemming behaviors. These are behaviors that a child typically engages in because they feel like it feels good for them. It serves an internal purpose, not because they want to get something or avoid something from the environment. And some of these examples can be like hand flapping, rocking, humming, tapping, or even making some repetitive noises. So perhaps, like a child may engage in loud noises simply because the sound or the vibration or like flapping their hands makes it feel just pleasant and it helps them release some of that excitement. Maybe with older kids, right, we see a lot of like stemming, and that's a form of getting those sensations like just released or reduce anxiety or just help them like regulate some of those emotions. Okay, so now we're going to talk about reinforcement. And the reinforcement is essentially like, how can we encourage positive behaviors? And the best way to do this is by using reinforcement. And reinforcement is one of the most powerful and evidence based strategies in behavior management. So essentially, reinforcement means we're adding or providing something after a behavior that makes it likely that it's going to happen more and more again. And this could be anything. It could be from like a smile or hey, you did a great job doing your homework, or extra playtime, or access to their preferred activity, or even just our attention. And it's very important to distinguish and to know that reinforcement is not the same as bribery. Bribery happens before a behavior. So that's kind of like saying, if you stop crying, I'll buy you a candy. But with reinforcement, on the other hand, that happens after the desired behavior. So we are rewarding something that we truly want to see more of. And another important thing to just consider is that reinforcement doesn't always have to be tangible. In fact, as time goes on, we want to be able to move away from rewards like toys or treats, and we want to move more towards like social or like natural reinforces like like pride or success or just simply feeling good about doing the right thing. Okay.
Can we talk about like where does validation come in with this? Like sometimes like there's a lot of talk about validating and a lot of parents struggle with that validating. Like I'm not going to validate this ridiculous behavior. But validating is not okaying that ridiculous behavior. It's saying, I understand you're having a hard time right now. I get that you're angry that I turned the TV off. It's like validating that you understand why they're angry. It doesn't like, what do you think about that in connection? I'm not trying to like change it up here, but in connection with reinforcement, because there is something to be said about feeling heard, like we have the hub in Houston, heard, understood, believed. There is some thought process that validation is also helpful in moving better behaviors forward. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead, Carmen.
no, I was going to say, Dr. Garcia, that validation is a very important component of a behavior management strategy. And when we are thinking about validation, we have to be very precise on what it is that we are validating. We want to be able to validate the emotion that they're feeling. We want to be able to validate the trigger if we know what the trigger is. And we want to be able to make them know and understand that this is a safe space. So letting them know that, hey, I understand you, I am validating you, but once the situation has been calm, it's how can we continue to move forward, or what else can we do to prevent us from going into this significant behavior that got us into trouble. I don't know, Dr. Garcia, if you were going to add to it.
No, that was perfect. I was gonna say again, with all of these things, right? It might not work for if you're a kid with autism. My nephew is on the autism spectrum, and my brother's always like that just does not work for him, you know. So it also depends on level of language too. But Carmen's exactly right. So I did want to put that little caveat.
I'm
Yeah.
a believer of whoever stays calmest wins. The calmer you stay in the volatile situations, like even if it's really tough as a parent, it is good because making a chaotic situation more chaotic, it never ends well. Like is one thought process. But so some of these reinforcers, like let's talk about some of the reinforcers and how they can be effectively used. But I also want to talk about and maybe you have a slide for this, but I want to talk about, like, as parents of neurotypical kids, if there is a confrontation, a common phrase that a parent says is, don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you, or look at me when I'm talking to you. Those are two phrases that parents commonly use. And those phrases don't always fit the bill for kids on the spectrum or ADHD kids or things like that. And one thing that I would say was a game changer at my house was the ability to walk away. When you feel yourself boiling, when you feel yourself like and your child, and they're escalating and escalating and they're very angry or they're very dysregulated, what I found is letting them walk away, letting them have that check and balance and calm down and get themselves back to center, or are refusing to talk at the height of their anger or whatever. Saying what you're saying is very important to me, and as soon as you feel a little bit better, why don't you go have a drink or whatever, then I'm going to be happy to talk to you about it. But I'm not going to talk to you about it when you're screaming at me. And then consistently doing that every single time and making it okay for them to walk away and get themselves back together, and knowing that I'm not angry and you can come back in 20 minutes and I'll be happy to talk to you. Those things mattered. So, but that's a flip of the coin of the neurotypical of don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you, right?
Thank you so much for sharing that. Also, I do want to briefly talk about some of the different types of reinforcers that we see, because again, a reinforcer is anything that will increase the likelihood of this behavior, or a particular behavior that we want to happen again and again. But it's also very important to know that not all reinforcers look the same, or that they even carry that same value or that same weight for every child, because what's motivating for like one kid might not work for another. And the main goal, right, is to find out what is meaningful and effective for that specific child. So let's say just because stars work for Johnny, it doesn't mean that stars are going to work for also for Peter. And it's also very important for us to know about these reinforcers, to use them consistently to continue getting the behavior that we want. One of the reinforcers that are typically used for like the little ones are, like food or drink. Those are what we call the primary reinforcers. And this can include like little snacks, crackers or gummies, or, anything that's edible and tiny. And this is usually done or given after we complete a task. And this can be, a very powerful motivator, especially like I said, for the younger ones, or for those with like limited communication skills. But however, it's very important to know that, hey, we just want to use them occasionally. And we always want to pair them with like a social reinforcement, like praise, so we can gradually shift away from needing food as a reward. We also have what it's called social reinforcers, and these involve positive attention or interaction from others. This could be like, again, like a smile, a high five, a verbal praise, or even like a nod of approval. And for many children, when they feel noticed and appreciated enough, this is like, yeah, this is a good motivation. So, I'm going to keep going. And one of the key components of social reinforcement is that, one, we want to be genuine, but two, we want to make praise very specific. So I don't mean, oh, just say good job. They're going to be like, good job for what? Like, I don't know what the good job is for. So it's usually saying it very specific. So, for example, I like how you started your homework right away, or thank you so much for using kind words, just being very specific about the praise that you are providing. And then over time, these like social reinforcers, they help build confidence, also independence, and stronger relationships. The other kind of reinforcer that we see are tangible reinforcers, or these are like very enjoyable items, like toys or stickers, art supplies, or like it could be even like a favorite object. And this is, for example, like using or earning stickers after finishing a task, or getting to choose a small toy, like at the end of the week. And tangible rewards, these are great for visual learners or for children who respond well to something they can see and that they can touch. And also, we just want to keep in mind that these rewards, it has to be like a very balanced system, right? Not, it's just not the only motivator and not the sole reason why a child behaves. So we always want to include some of that also, like social reinforcement. We also have activities and privileges. So these are opportunities to do something fun or something preferred, like choosing the game for a family night, or using the iPad for maybe 10 minutes, or helping with a favorite chore. These activity-based reinforcers are really effective for like our older kiddos or for those who truly value independence. So they teach, responsibility, they teach natural cause and effect. So, like, for example, when you finish your homework, you can earn time to ride your bike, like things like that. We also have a token, or the token economy, how we call it. These are symbolic reinforcers. So essentially by themselves, like just the actual token, or the penny or the star, whatever it is, by themselves, they don't have any value. But the value comes in when they can exchange it for something else. So it's kind of like earning points, right? Or earning money or tickets. So this might look like the child earning 1 star for each completed task. And then after they get, like 5 stars, they can get a preferred activity or a preferred item. And these token economy systems, they're great for teaching delayed gratification. And by this, I mean is that we're helping children learn to wait and plan for their rewards. So yeah, now we're gonna go on to the next slide. Okay, so we talked about the different types of like reinforcers, right? But now we're going to talk about how we can implement some of these reinforcements effectively. Because again, reinforcement is most powerful when it is intentional, when it is consistent. And by consistent, I mean it has to be more than 2 weeks. If we say, oh, I did it consistently and it was done for 3 days, it's not going to work. And the other important factor is that it has to match the child's motivation. And we have different forms of this. So the first one is a natural reinforcement. So this is ideally whenever we can, we want to use that natural, that reward that feels very natural. And we want to be able to connect it with the behavior. So if you finish your homework, you earn playtime, or asking politely gets your help right away. We also have, just knowing and remembering the difference between bribery and reinforcement. Bribery happens after the problem starts, but reinforcement is planned beforehand. And it's also given after a desired behavior. So, for example, like if you say come while we shop, you can pick a snack afterwards. We also, it's also important to know and understand that if the reinforcer doesn't work, it was never a reinforcer. So reinforcement only works if it motivates the child. So if the behavior that we are desiring doesn't increase, it means the reward wasn't meaningful for them. So it's very important to stay flexible, because what's motivating today or this week might change next week. And also another thing is what we call catch the child being good. So make it a habit to notice and praise positive behaviors, even the small ones. So how I was saying earlier that sometimes it's so easy to catch the bad behavior because that's usually when parents are calling out the child. But when the behavior or when the child is engaging in inappropriate behavior, we usually don't comment on it or we don't say anything about it. So making very simple, specific comments like, I like how you waited your turn, can go a long way. Because again, children repeat what gets noticed. So the more we notice these good moments and what stand out, the more they're going to be able to do it. Now, there's also what we call reciprocal play, or it's known as turn taking play. And this type of play means that we take turns and interactions with another person during play. And it doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be structured. It's all about being gentle or gently joining the child's world and helping them enjoy a back and forth interaction. This is not about trying to control the play, and this is definitely not about making it a teaching moment. So we shouldn't be saying, oh, what color is this? Or what sound does the train make? It's simply just trying to join the kids' world and playing gently, with them.
Can you give me examples of what if I have a 4-year-old, what if I have a 14-year-old, and what if I have a 54-year-old in this?
So reciprocal play is usually more for the little ones, right? For like school age. So it's typically what we see before 8 years old. So if you see that your child is playing with Legos, instead of saying, oh, let's build a tower or what color is this? You just repeat or paraphrase what they're saying. It's usually like you're being like a sportscaster. And if we go to the next slide, it shows you or kind of talks about some of the steps of how we can do this or how we can build connection and encourage continued positive behaviors during play. So the first part is just to observe. We want to start quietly, watching our child, what the child is doing. We want to be able to notice or we want to be able to notice what they're interested in. How are they playing? What is capturing their attention? Because this helps us, the adults, understand their world and to find the best time to join in. We also want to be able to imitate. So, imitate or mirror their play. So, if they're rolling a car, you roll one too. So, if they're lining up blocks, you line them beside them as well. And you can say things like, I see you and I enjoy what you are doing. We also want to be able to describe. So, as the kids play, you describe what your child is doing out loud. Like I said, like a sportscaster. So, oh, you're stacking blocks, or oh, you made this car go fast. We also want to be able to reflect or repeat or paraphrase what your child is saying. And we also want to be able to promote skills. So as you play, you look for chances to promote new skills, maybe taking turns, sharing, or solving problems. And then also finally, praise. We want to be able to praise and use praise for positive behaviors using very short and specific language.
We only have about like 4 minutes left, and I want to go for older adults, children, and adolescents. I mean, I know, and like I said, there's all ages here, and I would say my experience is you have TTB, which I call typical teenage behavior, and then we have kids that are on the spectrum or ADHD or other diagnoses. That typical teenage behavior is like on steroids, right? Um, and so, can you talk to us? And again, we only just have a few minutes about older adults, children, and adolescents. Give us a few ideas on that.
Yeah, so the same principles that we use as children, they say they still apply for our older kiddos, but the difference is how we use them. Like that's what truly changes. And when we're thinking about the shift from children to adolescent, we want to think about collaboration, communication, and independence. Because let's be honest, teens hate to be told what to do. That's just part of being teens, right? So we want to be able to use very clear and specific language instead of just vague requests. So, for example, instead of saying, could you help out more around the house, which can be confusing or it could be too broad, we could say something like, please do the dishes after dinner tonight. We also want to be able to engage in some nonverbal communication because, again, for our kids on the spectrum, it's very hard for them to know and to interpret some of the body language. So it's important, for us to know that if they're not looking at us or giving us eye contact, that doesn't mean that they're being disrespectful or that they're disinterested. So just being cautious of that. We can also use some of their intense interest to kind of get them talking about what it is, that we want to have a conversation about because this builds trust and this opens the door for a deeper conversation about other topics later. So when we're communicating with like older children or adolescents, the goal is to make it very clear, make it respectful, and make it very responsive, focusing on understanding rather than correcting. Because again, this type of communication makes the connection stronger and it also makes the behavioral support much more effective as well.
So basically, meeting them where they are. I think of that show Atypical and his fascination with penguins, right? And that show, but and he could talk for days about penguins and where they live and everything he's ever learned about it. But that's building trust because that was his safe space of what he knows and what he prefers to talk about. I got it.
Absolutely. And another very component, and this is, I know we're running on short on time, is instead of using don't use you statements, use I statements. So say something like, I feel frustrated when things are left undone, instead of saying, you never help around the house, because I statements reduce blame and make conversations less defensive.
I love that. That is good. And we are running short on time today. What I want you guys to kind of end with is this, like this contact information here. Should they want to go further or schedule an appointment with you or someone on your team, we put the contact information in the chat box, but they can reach out to you through your email. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I know that we did put both of your contact information in the box. This is, I think, it's a never ending of the most effective parenting ways for all kids and especially the neurodiverse. But you guys have given a lot of practical tips, and it's easy to hear this and easy to hear and think about how you would implement that in your day to day when the crisis isn't happening, whenever the meltdown isn't happening, the headbanging isn't happening, or other things like that. But I think peeling away and hearing some of this, first of all, hearing that you're not alone in your journey, is knowing that you're not alone, and some of the things that are going on at your house for sure. But number two, that there is help and there is support and there is best practices. And a lot of it's trial and error. There's not a perfect, as we said, a manual in the beginning for all of this, and a lot of it is going to be specifically tailored to your loved one and what works for them. So thank you for sharing that. As promised, this is our upcoming webinars link. You guys can peruse any additional webinars that we have coming up in the future, and can register for those. We always offer free personalized consultations as it relates to planning for the future of your loved one with a disability. This QR code on the screen will take you to our calendar where you can schedule your free personalized consultation. So most of the people that we work with have an advisor. Their advisor doesn't have any background in special needs, and that's okay. Maybe you've done a lot of planning and you just want a second opinion. Maybe you've not done any planning, you're just getting started, you got a new diagnosis, but you want to get it right. And maybe you got started and put it on the shelf and need to pick up where you left off. So wherever you are in your journey, we can help you. So having said that, I just want to remind everybody that everybody's going to get a copy of today's slides and a link to the recording in your inbox. If you don't have it later this afternoon, check your spam, because sometimes it'll go to your spam. When you register for the Consolidated Planning Group webinars, I think there's a question that says, are you okay with communications from CPG? If you mark no for that, you will not get an email with the slides and with the presentation, because we're not going to contact somebody that doesn't want to be contacted. Okay, so thanks so much, everyone. Certainly been a pleasure, and I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thank you both for being here. You guys are awesome, and we will look forward to partnering with you again soon. Take care. Bye now.